Hi, good morning and afternoon to everybody. We're here to talk about offline password cracking and training cats. And my presenter is Cloud Prem is ignoring me, but he will come up in a minute. All right, there's my social media and my email if you would like to contact me. And by the way, there's going to be a lot of references related to this talk. I'll be sharing a PDF at the end with all the links. Also, my friend Tindra may drop some links, although once we started looking at how the Slack was working, things went by really fast. So she's going to use her judgment on what's useful. But if you have any questions, a lot of them may well be answered by those links. And why should you listen to me? Obviously, you should not. You should listen to Cloud and Prem instead. But I'm a thought follower. I've been in InfoSec for 20 years. I have all the certifications, and it's just basically alphabet soup. And again, special thanks to my friend Tindra for handling the links. What are we going to be doing? We're going to be doing a little activity. I'm going to be talking about definitions. I'm going to explain why it's hard, what we ought to do, and the risk mitigations and responses. And then we'll talk about the important part, which is the cats. What are we not doing? I'm not going to tell you how to crack passwords. There's a lot of really good information on that already. If you don't know, you can watch Royce Williams' Password Cracking 201 talk from B-Sides Las Vegas 2017. You can get yourself a GPU and a credential done. You can run Hashcat or John the Ripper or really whatever you choose. And then, of course, you're going to win the 2024 DEF CON Core Logic Crack Me If You Can contest. Easy as that. Now, Zoom stream doesn't really have this, but in the privacy of your own room, please raise your hand and put it down when I list an algorithm that is okay for saving passwords in an identity store. MD5. Salted SHA-1. Shark. That's not a real algorithm, but it should be, you know. Salted SHA-512. Salted SHA-3. AES-512. I'm sorry, our algorithm is in another castle. None of those are okay. If your hand is still up, give yourself a high five, just like Cloud did. So what's a password cracking attack and what's a password dump? So we're just going to use some MITRE attack definitions because that's the easiest. Password cracking is when an adversary uses it to attempt to recover usable credentials, such as plain text passwords, when they've got the credential material, like the hash passwords. It's usually done on their own machine, so you can't see them doing it, and you don't know that they're doing it. Password cracking is not past the hash. That's when you use the hash value directly instead of cracking it. It's not phishing, where you just ask the user to tell you their password, and they do because they're very nice and polite about that. It's not credential stuffing, where what you do is you guess credential pairs in the active application, or password spraying, which is where you guess a few credentials per user in the application. It's not OS credential dumping, because that's how you get the hash values to crack. And many of these are going to be enabled by a downgrade attack. One of the great downgrade attacks, of course, is anything that can get you to NTL MV1, Windows New Technology Land, Miniature 1 authentication, which we have killed. Thank you, Steve Seifus. Thank you for your service. But why is this hard? It's very difficult. One reason is that there's two different reasons to store passwords. In one of them, you are the person or the device authenticating to a system. You need the clear text password to log in. If you store this on a computer, you probably want to encrypt it. If you store it on your head, you want to stop doing that and put it on a computer and encrypt it hopefully with the password manager. If you store it on paper that only you can access and you have a different password for every login, that's actually pretty good. Keep it up, or use 1Password. But this is totally adequate for many people's threat models. It's also not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is this, where you are the system doing the authenticating. You're probably authenticating a lot of users and devices. You need to know that a user or device password matches the correct password, but you don't actually need to know the password itself. Sorry, Prem went into one of his cave beds and Cloud just jumped on him. My co-presenters are very busy with their own thing, I guess. But this is what I'm talking about with an identity store. You cannot lose the passwords if you don't know the passwords. And it is best if you don't need the passwords, you don't know them. There's more reasons this is hard. Cryptography is the worst. I mean, that's just how it is. Perfect is the enemy of the good does not apply to architecting cryptography. It is always going to be easier to screw it up than it is to get it right. And if you screw it up even a tiny little bit, someone's going to break it, and then you'll be sad. Another thing is that the hashes are too fast now. All of the secure hashing algorithms approved by NIST, well regarded by everybody else, they were all chosen because they're fast. They're fast in general purpose computer chips. They're even faster in specially designed chips like ASICs and GPUs. A modern GPU can test millions or billions of cryptographically secure hashes per second, and post-quantum cryptography just makes it worse. When I say that hashes are too fast for passwords now, I mean now started in like 1979. That is when Morris put together DesCrypt, which was for Unix systems, because they realized that, these hash passwords are not doing us any good. It's always been a problem. It's just now it's really, really obvious and bad. And one thing that's important to understand is that cracking the hash is not breaking the algorithm. You haven't broken SHA-2 if you have cracked a SHA-2 password. What you have done is you have tried a list, hashed every word on it until you find the password. It's not feasible to find the input for a cryptographically secure hash if that input were random and long enough in the first place. You need a certain amount of entropy. But the problem is users do not make random passwords. They really do not make random passwords. The passwords are often pretty short anyway. I think we're looking at a practical minimum of, I think it's 12-ish now, but like double check, because as far as I know, it changed yesterday. And then password crackers use word lists from RockU and other breaches to find all the passwords that have already been done, and the one you used in that breach that got cracked before. And a modern GPU can test millions or billions of secure hashes per second. So let's talk about word lists. RockU 2009 was the first big clear test password breach. There were 32 million accounts. Most password dictionaries have millions of RockU passwords in them. They supplement it with passwords from other breaches. Have I Been Pwned by Troy Hunt is a super great website that talks a lot about this. It lists 754 owned websites. Most of these have cracked passwords. Attackers publish credentials to enable credential stuffing and distract offenders. And it's fun, I guess. You should go to Have I Been Pwned if you have not done this before, and see if your credentials have been stolen. There are 13 billion pwned accounts right now. That's kind of a lot. Salting isn't going to help that much. Salting a hash means that you add a long random string and then store that string with the hash output. Cracking one salted passwords takes the exact same amount of time as cracking one password. What salting does is it protects at scale. Cracking many salted passwords means that the word list needs to be tried separately for each ID. But those GPUs are really fast now. It doesn't slow things down that much. Salts also prevent the use of rainbow tables, which are pre-computed hash digests for fast lookup. Rainbow tables are actually kind of outdated. I've got some links on it on what they were and how they worked. They were lookup tables that you could pre-compute mathematically, that you didn't have to store every single lookup. Now storage is cheap. Compute is cheap. Rainbow tables are nice, but they're basically not necessary, even if, even if you're trying to crack a whole bunch of passwords. So what should we actually do? You should figure it out. We need to use cryptographic functions meant for passwords. NIST requires a suitable one-way key derivation function. That's from 863B 2017, 5.1.1.2, which I have read many, many, many times. NIST recommends PBKDF2 or Balloon. Nobody likes Balloon, don't use it. If you're using FIPS 140, you have to use PBKDF2. That's your only option. The draft's going to add Argon 2 and scrypt. bcrypt is another good algorithm for this, but it's not a key derivation function. Someday I dream that NIST will put this in a way where all the actually good password functions can count. The difference between bcrypt and Argon 2, there's actually a trade-off for your UI. If you're doing passwords at scale, first of all, you need more information than I'm giving you in this talk, but that does sort of change what your requirements are and what the best algorithm is. But in general, do not roll your own off. It must be perfect, and good enough is never going to be good enough. Next, you need to implement that password function correctly. Choose an appropriate work factor. For bcrypt, that'll be like 12. For PBKDF2, that'll be in the tens of thousands. The algorithm's going to use a cryptographically secure underlying function like SHA-2, SHA-3, HMAC, Blowfish, whatever. The algorithm will integrate a long random salt. If you are creating a salt, you are doing it wrong. The algorithm does it as part of the algorithm. You should also consider using a pepper or a secret salt. That's storing part of the system, that salt, elsewhere in an HSM on another system. This is pretty difficult. I'm told it's reasonable in some situations, but whatever it is, there are people who can roll their own auth. I am not one of them, and you probably aren't either. Cloud can do it though. So what's the real risk here? What are the mitigations and what are the responses? Your password storage algorithm is your last line of defense. Offline password cracking is only a risk to your system under two circumstances. One, it's more efficient than all those other attacks we talked about, pass the hash, phishing, credential stumping, password spraying, and all the stuff you can get via a downgrade attack. The attacker also has to have gotten all the hash values from OS credential dumping, data from a configuration repository, exfiltrating the entire password database, reading your public API if you're spoutable. Do not put password hashes in your API. One of the ironies of the whole spoutable thing is that how they stored their passwords was about the only thing they did do right. And so on. The problem is that offline password cracking is always a risk to the users that reused their passwords, and you know they did. It opens them up to credential stuffing or password spraying, and that is why we do not respect the book. We do not disrespect the book. A lot of people will make fun of these offline, password journals. They are better than most of the stuff I've seen a lot of people recommend. Password managers are good. Get one password. That's the one I like and use. KeePass has a good rep. Bitwarden also does. You know, beyond that, I have not reviewed in detail, so I can't say, but password managers are good. Anything short of that, the internet password logbook is probably going to be better. What are the other mitigations? So we use an appropriate password function in work factor. We use password block lists to prevent users from choosing known bad passwords, but be selective here. You're not intended to block billions of passwords. It will drive your users nuts. Require more characters and allow up to 64. Allow users to paste passwords so that their password manager works. Allow users to view the passwords because that encourages hard to type passwords, especially on mobile. Yeah, shoulder surfing is a real risk. Making it so it's too hard to type passwords so users pick really terrible passwords is also a major risk. You know, promote or require password managers to encourage strong passwords. I don't know why every single organization does not give everybody a password manager. Yes, a lot of us have single sign-on. There's still always going to be a few extra, you know. And finally, give useful feedback to users when a password is rejected. If someone puts in a password, you know, in the generate a password stage, and they can't figure out why it's getting rejected, they will enter simpler and simpler passwords until they get one through. And they can usually get one through. Password 123, password 123, you know. And finally, multi-factor authentication mitigates many of the risks that are possible. And so what do we do if we lose the hashes? We require the users to change their compromised or suspected compromised passwords as soon as possible. If you don't do that, you are doing it wrong. You'll activate your computer emergency response team. And you hope that your storage method buys enough time because that's all it's really intended to do. It buys you time. You know, here's an illustration of a very effective cert. Basically, all passwords can be cracked eventually. You're trying to buy time. One of the things that Mandiant does is they publish an industry report called mTrends that one of the things they do is track dwell time, which is the time between when someone gets in, when an attacker gets into a site versus when they do whatever it is they were going to do. That time frame has been dropping, and now it's like 16 days last I checked for the 2003 mTrends. 16 days is long enough to crack an awful lot of passwords. And I think 2016, Florencio and Hurley published a paper called Pushing on String. There's a really nice talk at PasswordCon from Hurley about that. And one of the things they do is talk about how many passwords do you need to completely own a site or a system or a company? It was somewhere around 10% probably. You don't need all the passwords, you just need a bunch, because once you start getting passwords, you have a valid account. MITRE ATT&CK's most used technique is valid accounts. Once you have an account, even the easiest throwaway, you know, user or non-human account, you can probably find a way to escalate it eventually. And now we're done with the passwords. And let's talk about why we're going to be training cats. For one thing, it makes them a lot more chill. Cats are more fun when they're less stressed and less scared about everything. One of the biggest reasons cats get taken to shelters is that they have behavioral problems. And a lot of the behavioral problems are because they're scared. Self-efficacy, even for cats, this works this way for people too, but knowing how to make things happen helps a lot with stress. There is my kitten taking me for a walk. Harnesses and carriers make transportation really easy. This was an actually very lengthy multimodal trip. We took them by bus, light rail, and car, and they were pretty chill during the whole thing. Shortly after this picture, they hopped out and started exploring the rail station. And you've probably seen this on social media. The cat is faster and has sharper teeth and nails than you do. It has no code of ethics or considerations for its own future. In a fair fight, the cat will win. Don't fight a cat, use your brain, use drugs, or socialize them a lot. It really does help. And finally, we have all, if we've ever had a cat, experienced, the delicate claw to the eyelid to get you up at 5 a.m. for breakfast. Yeah. If a cat knows how to get food in other ways, they tend not to do that, which is really quite nice. Mine mostly just snuggle harder or drop, little felt mousies on my arm. So before you start, you make sure the reward is worthwhile. The cat decides what's worthwhile. Very useful thing, Churu is life. As far as my cats are concerned, this is laced with cocaine. Nobody learns well when they're scared or stressed. So use classical conditioning, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to reduce that fear and stress. In general, gestures are better cues than words. Pretty much always start with gestures. And then if you really want them to obey word commands, then you can switch over once you've got the behavior down. And finally, respect their attention span. Keep the session short and end on a high note. And here he is, ready for a training session. He is very relaxed. Oh, and so one thing that's helpful, this Kitty Kindergarten by Sophia Yen, it does not have the best production values. It's a seminar in a shelter, but it's where I learned how to do a lot of this. Here, we're doing the gestures. See? There we go. Classical conditioning pairs a stimulus with a reinforcement. I learned the most about this from a dog behavior book because, frankly, most of the training material is for dogs, but it works basically the same. Patricia McConnell, Cautious Canine, And if a stimulus is stressful, a positive reward helps reduce the stress. It's good for scary noises, transportation, grooming, vacuum cleaners, all that kind of thing. It's kind of a judgment call. It can reduce the stress causing bad behavior, or at least behavior you don't like. But it can also look like rewarding the bad behavior. So you want to be careful to avoid that dynamic. It happens a lot less than we think we do, but it does sometimes happen. In general, try to replace the behavior you don't like instead of trying to end it. So if your cat takes up smoking, that's cotton tubing, it's not a cigarette. If your cat takes up doing stuff you don't like, find something else for them to do. Operant conditioning is the fun stuff. It encourages voluntary behavior with a reinforcement. You can fist bump. There you go. Negative reinforcement backfires. Don't do that. You use a clicker or a marker word to communicate clearly which behavior got the reinforcement. The clickers are loud, like there's a clicker. I only have 2 hands, so I mostly use the marker words. However, study shows that clickers are more effective. If your goal is kitty parkour, then you probably need clickers. So the actual mechanics, learning the mechanics of operant conditioning, again, there's not a lot for cats. Great Courses has a really nice video series called Dog Training 101. Never pay list for Great Courses. You can get trials, the library has it, or they have, regularly 85–90% off sales. So, but that particular Dog Training 101 course is super helpful and fun to watch, I thought. You click a few times to sort of charge the clicker. So, it works. And then when you're looking for a behavior, you click on your mark the instant you see the right behavior and reward as soon as you can. So, high five. You try to pay in position, which is if you're teaching a sit, you try to get the treat to them before they stand back up. And finally, remember that clicking and marking is communicating. It's not the reward. Reward is reward. Don't be a wage thief. Nobody likes a wage thief. One of the things I've taught them is they hop right into their carrier when I pat it. It's very helpful. So how do you get them to the behavior? You hold the treat so they follow it. You can do what they call shaping. That's waiting for the right behavior. And then when it happens, you click and mark and reward it. If you're teaching a complex trick, break it down into easier steps. And the goal for each session is to reward several times per minute. And if you're not, pick something easier. If you're doing a shaping, go with the more approximate behavior and just let them get closer and closer, but be sure to be rewarding frequently enough so they keep trying. Here, Prem is learning how to play fetch, and they do know fetch. However, Cloud likes fetch a lot more than Prem does. Personality does come in. So intermittent reinforcement. Once the desired behavior is pretty solid, and you do need to get it to be pretty solid, you can either introduce a verbal cue or you can slowly fade the reinforcement to be increasingly rare. Only work on one of those at a time. Don't try to do both. You will confuse the cat. You still have to communicate clearly, and you still have to reward sometimes. If you stop the rewards, the behavior will eventually stop. And, don't be a wage thief. And that is how you train cats to do tricks. And so I'm really hoping there were questions. I deliberately did this a little bit short so that we could be sure to have questions. And because having sentient demos is probably one of the stupider life choices I have made.
Okay, so there were a lot of comments. Your talk generated a whole bunch of commentary. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but I would recommend that you go into the channel and have a look. There were two questions that came up near the end. So one was from George. Any recommendations or experience with pheromone collars for cats with behavioral concerns?
So I don't know about collars. I do know that if your cat is super stressed, the pheromone infusers can help. This is a general sort of recommendation for that. It goes in with the whole classical conditioning discussion is what we're doing here. And so, by the way, how many of you can harness your cat like that? Anyway, but yeah, definitely if you've got a stressed out cat, pheromones help. And I've used Feel Away, and I believe that there's a couple competing brands.
Okay, the next one was from Mike. Have you had experience breaking bad habits like fighting between cats?
So these were Cloud and Prem are letter mates. They love each other a lot. But yeah, Prem is definitely the boss, but Cloud's pretty okay with that. And because Cloud is actually the more physically coordinated. If he wanted to beat up Prem, he totally could. So I don't have direct experience of that. Something that helps is making sure they each have their own space. Like if one of them is blocking resources from the other, make sure that there's another source. They don't tend to resource block, so I feed them at the same time and place, it's fine. But if they did, I would be feeding them separately to make sure they both got it. They've also both got places that they can hang out that the other, there's plenty of room. I actually have 2 floor-to-ceiling cat trees, one in my office so they can watch me while I'm working and judge me there. And then one in the living room so they can watch me while I'm cooking or eating or, hanging out in the living room, and they can judge me there. And we've got a number of cat beds. One of the things I've actually been trying to teach them is while I'm working, I don't like them jumping on my desk. So I say cave, and, they will frequently go to the cat bed and then look at me like, yeah, he's looking at me now. Where's my treat? I'm in the bed. So there are animal behaviorists. Your vet should probably also have good advice. It's probably specific to the animals too. But another thing is when I give them, I feed them a mix of wet food and kibble just for various reasons. And they never get the kibble in a bowl. They always get it in a puzzle. And some of the puzzles are honestly hilarious. There was that bone puzzle you saw. They tend to make more of them for dogs, but there are also puzzles for cats. There's those little treat balls that they roll around. Excuse me, but this is the funniest. This is my favorite puzzle because it's honestly hilarious. So you put the treats in here and they learn to flip them over, and the treats fall in here and they have to pull it out. And so I feel like this keeps them entertained and enriched and lets them do hunting. There's some people really love laser pointers. Other people feel like the cat doesn't really get to complete the prey cycle. They don't get to catch and kill anything. They don't get to eat anything. So there's sort of mixed reviews on how they work. I'm actually too lazy for them because you have to keep holding the laser pointer. But if you just throw a mousey and he brings it back and then you throw it again, that works pretty well. And like I said, one of my cats loves fetch and the other doesn't. He'll do it sometimes. He gets jealous of the treats, but so yeah, that's about all I have. And I'm sorry, I don't have a more direct answer for that.
No, that's okay. So I've got one last question from Bex. So if a cat has like learned behavior, for example, so the example seems to be that certain people looking after Bex's cats, when it comes time, when the cat gets hungry, the cat realizes that if it pulls like a picture off the wall or whatever, then people react to that and then realize, oh, okay, you're hungry, and then feed it. And so it's now learned the fact that if it moves the picture off the wall, it will get fed. Is there any way that you can stop the cat from realizing that?
That's a hard one because you have successfully trained your cat to knock the picture off the wall. And so what needs to happen is, one, that needs to stop working. But the thing is that will take a long time because the cat has learned it. And actually, intermittent reinforcement is more rewarding. It's the difference between Vegas and a job. Vegas is a lot more fun. So they will continue to play Vegas and knock the picture off the wall. So one of my cats sort of likes pushing things off the headboard in the morning. And what happened was I stopped reacting to that. And I also insisted that before he got food, he had to snuggle me. So I would pick him up and hold him and pet him for a while and then carry him to food. And he eventually learned that the way to get food was to climb on me and start kneading and purring, which, you know, he just snuggles harder. And well, I love that for me. You know, and so find something else for him to do to signal that it's food time. You know, the other one will bring me the little mouse and start dropping it very insistently on my leg. I've had them start, come on, high five. I've had them start doing that. And so one of the things with training is it's not that dogs are easier to train than cats precisely. It's that if you screw up the mechanics, the dogs are much more forgiving. They will keep trying. However, if you screw up the mechanics with a cat, will eventually be like, you don't know how to do this. You are untrainable. And I'm not going to bother with you anymore. Because from their perspective, they are providing a prompt and you have been trained to feed them at the prompt. And so, yeah, replacing the behavior, you know, insisting they do something else before you take them for food. And, you know, with other people, that starts getting more complicated because you know, when I was teaching them high five, first I got them to high five for me. And then it took actually a lot of work to generalize that to other people. And they will give high fives to other people that they know now. Not sure they do it for strangers, but you know, it can be done. And part of it's just figuring out something else, some other way that they can tell you they're hungry and that it's food time and that they are very disappointed in you. And everybody have a great afternoon.